Hi, I'm Steve Latham at the Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics, and I'm speaking today with Joe Carvalko, who is teaching in our Summer Institute. So I want to start off by having you describe a little bit of your educational background and your professional history.
All right, thank you, Steve. Well, I started out in engineering, and I'd worked in engineering probably for nearly 15 years, doing research and development. And I was researching at the time, doing biomedical research actually. We were looking at artificial intelligence and trying to see if we couldn't devise a scheme by which we separated the white blood cell types. I did that for about 5 years, and some of my other activities were involved with NASA and circumventing the moon to find a landing spot, for instance. But my degree was in electrical engineering at the time, and I was mentored by some really good folks where I worked. I worked in essentially a research laboratory. But somewhere along the line, I decided that I may want to be a lawyer, patent lawyer in particular. And so I went from research and development into patent law via law school, obviously. I went to Quinnipiac Law. And I should mention, prior to that, my engineering degree was with Fairfield University. So I went to Quinnipiac Law School. And when I graduated, I took my bar and then I took my patent bar. And so I got right into patent law. But I was also doing a lot of trial work in patent law at the same time. And I did that pretty much for about 8 years or so, until I went in-house and I joined essentially an international company that needed a patent lawyer who knew something about litigation, who knew something about trying cases as well. And I became the general counsel for that company, and I traveled essentially throughout the world. I tried cases, or had cases being tried for me, in places like India or Switzerland or England and South America and China and pretty much the entire world, with the exception of Australia and New Zealand, I think. So I did that for many years, maybe 8 or 9 years or so, and then I went to work for a company called Gateway 2000. You may have heard of them. They're in the computer business, as their chief patent lawyer, essentially. And I worked there for a while in South Dakota. And I came back. I started up my own engineering company for about 5 years with some products of my own. And then I went back into patent law, essentially. Worked for the Hartford Fire Insurance Company as a patent lawyer for a while. And then I went in-house. I went outside, rather, and worked for a law firm for several years. And then probably about maybe 6-7 years ago, I started my own practice here in Connecticut. Meanwhile, I got a master's in fine arts from the Fairfield University. Partly because I've always sort of been a perpetual student. In all of those years when I practiced law, I was also teaching. So I taught in Western Connecticut State University. I taught social responsibility of business back in the 80s, for instance. I taught at University of South Dakota Law School. I taught law and computer science, or computer law, I guess it was. And then I taught at Quinnipiac, both as trial practice law for about 8 years, and I've been teaching there now for about 12 years in law, science, and technology, a curriculum that I developed for them, and then it's taught that ever since.
So fair disclosure, right? We overlapped there. Before I came to Yale, I was also a law professor at Quinnipiac, teaching health law and bioethics. So
yeah. And it's been a sort of, I wouldn't say an eclectic career, but there's been a lot of chapters to it. And as I said before, I've always sort of liked teaching and going back to school. And so I've sort of made a life, I guess, of both inside and out, practicing, earning a living doing that, and took the cream off the top of academics and teaching the way I did.
So tell me a little bit, here you are teaching in the Bioethics Summer Institute. Tell me a little bit about your ethics interests.
I guess my ethics interests started, of course, when I was very young. My mother was in healthcare, and so maybe got the notion that I was always drawn to that, as a side interest. And I think that's probably why I went into research in this when I did, in terms of looking at some of the biomedical interests, in hematology more broadly, as an electrical engineer, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until I got into law that I had the opportunity to teach courses. And as I said, one of the courses that I did teach was the social responsibility of business and society, which really addresses all of the ethical issues. If you remember, Bhopal was a big issue back in the 80s when I was teaching the course. But that was just a small part, of what was becoming a field, I guess is the way to describe it. Mm-hmm. And so as a lawyer, I've always sort of had a deep sense of ethics. The bioethical part, the bio part of all of this ethics, probably I didn't get deep into it until I put this course together, Law, Science, and Technology, mm-hmm. about 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. And a good part of that book, or I should say book, I'll explain that in a minute, but a good part of that course teaches the bioethical component, right, which gets into genetics, genomes, and all of the implications of what it meant then, because when I started teaching, we were embroiled in the stem cell technology debate here in this country, whether we could use embryos, for instance. And so I began to do more research on the ethical part of that. And I discovered that technology in general really lacked any strong ethical foundation, of which bioethics is part, and technoethics is also part, because a lot of technology is much a part of bioethics today. So that's how I got interested in it.
Now you are a prolifically published author. You've written how many books?
I guess I've written about 8 books now. And I try, again, that's another one of my interests, but the interest is really part of the whole picture, of my interest, for instance, in bioethics. So I was a couple of years back, I wrote, I think it was 3 years ago, The Techno-Human Shell, A Jump in the Evolutionary Gap, which speaks to technology, and more specifically, throughout the book, we talked about biotechnology. And the implications of going forward with what is now gene editing technology and so forth. But it was pretty much anticipated in this book. And then I was asked by the ABA to write a textbook, essentially. It became a desk reference, I guess, for science and technology for lawyers. And I did that. And that was sort of a gateway to be more involved with publishing, and so I was on the editorial board for the American Bar Association Law and Science section, and then now I'm I'm an associate editor for Technology and Society. So I do publishing through that. Mm-hmm. Other things that I've published, frankly, were more in the line of some science fiction. Involving technology, for instance. And then there was a novel that I'd written about a case that I tried back in the 80s involving trying to locate a lost soldier in North Korea, for instance. Mm-hmm. And then I've written a couple of books on poetry and some other such things. But at any rate, it keeps me busy.
Yeah. So what are you teaching in the summer program this summer?
I'm teaching what's called a balancing act. In the bioethics in the age of accelerating technology, and so we're really examining what are the drivers, that's causing this sort of evolution in biotechnology, and so we're going back and looking at what the seeds were, and why this garden is growing at the rate it is, and it's a combination of things. It's partly the fact that technology grows exponentially, right? We take what we know from last year, we add to it this year, and we take that sum and we add to it. So you can see that the curve goes something like this. Unfortunately, the curve of human understanding sometimes goes like this, and there's a gap between that curve that goes like this and where we are.
Yeah.
So we talk about things like that, but we talk about the fact that not only is technology growing exponentially just simply because of the nature of knowledge, but that sciences, really in technology have created so much opportunity by virtue of scaling, so that when I started in my career as an electrical engineer back when, I actually started out in tubes. So we had tube technology, and then I remember my first transistor, and then I remember my first semiconductor chip.
Chip, right.
Yeah,
Right.
and then I remember my first small microcomputer, for instance. And so I've seen this thing grow. So we grew from a few chips on a few transistors on a chip, like maybe 20 back in the day, back in the 60s, to IBM's announcement recently of 30 billion chips, okay, on something as small as my fingernail, all right? And you can imagine, but they're going to be putting many of these on something as large as my fist. So 30 billion times, you name it, is a pretty powerful machine.
Yeah, I remember reading that we have more computing power in our phones than NASA had when we sent a man to the moon.
That's right. That's right. So at any rate, that's driving it. We're looking at, because of that, okay, we have now faster communications, so that's driving it. And because all of that's coming together, it makes for economic opportunities. So Wall Street gets involved, and they're putting more and more money into this thing. So it's quite an engine that we've got going here. But that's the good news. The bad news is that we've got to keep up with it ethically. We've got to keep up with it in a moral way to make sure that we don't stub our toe and do something that could be, rather disastrous.
As we've been reading about in the news, right?
That's
There's
right.
lots of worries about whether we've already had some disastrous toe stubbing with
That's right.
the role of social media in politics, and with questions about online privacy and online life, online distractions, the effects it's having on our brain that we're so plugged into technology, and on and on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's it's a very dynamic field, and one of the things that I like about being given the opportunity, frankly, to engage you all in the summer program, is that we have a phenomenal source of energy here, right? That really warms my heart, because you can see that you have students which are they're smart, they're ambitious, they're engaged, and I can tell you, it's only a few times in my life when I've really been with groups like this that you really feel the energy. It really carries the day. So at any rate, I want to thank you, and frankly thank the school for the invitation, because we're doing something I think pretty
and
remarkable.
Lori Bruce, who directs
Lori
the
Bruce.
summer program and brings in all those amazing students.
Well, that's true.
And
That's right.
brings in all these amazing
That's
faculty.
right.
I get to interview all of you, but she gets to actually pick you. So
That's right. Well, I've known Lori for several years now, and we work on the community medical ethics.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
board or committee, I guess it is. So we've got to know one another in that respect.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the time. Thanks for
All right.
coming by for the interview.
All right, Steve. Yeah.
And thank you for teaching the summer program.
Good. Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
All right.